In what might go down as the worst quote of the year from any Habs player, Chris Wideman takes shots at the Leafs for letting their ATO goalie play 1 minute of NHL ice time. We'll be breaking that down for a while, plus we'll get into some guys that the Habs loaned down to Laval for the playoff push, and finally an important Tankathon update, so you won't want to miss this edition of Habs Digest. Hello, bonjour, ahoy, and welcome to today's news edition of Habs Digest. I'm your host, Josh Gosse, and quickly, before we get into the video, a quick reminder to hit subscribe. We're almost at 5,000 subscribers, so if you could hit it, that'd be great. Also, shout out to Keith, who I met today. Thanks for, it's always cool to meet fans in person. Thank you, Keith, for watching, and if you're watching this video, leave a comment. It'd be great. Let's get into this first thing today. Okay, let's talk about this. I mean, I know Hockey Junkie just put out a video on this earlier today, but I had to talk about it too. Chris Wideman gets extremely salty. So if you guys watched the game last night, you know that the Leafs brought in an amateur tryout goalie, Xhekaj Alexander. He played 1 minute of ice time in a 7-1 win for the Leafs, and Chris Wideman says they'll get what they deserve in a few weeks. Okay, so I'm seeing the vast majority of people are like, Chris, what are you talking about? Like, let the kid live his dream without having to be salty about it. And some people are saying, oh, without context, it might just be a lighthearted jab. But in my mind, how could this be a lighthearted jab? He says they'll get what they deserve in a few weeks. And I think the only way that you can take that is that the Leafs will lose in the playoffs and they'll deserve it for what they did in this game. I'm not really sure how else you can interpret it. If you have a different opinion, let me know in the comments down below, please, because I'd like to hear a differing viewpoint on this. And, of course, Chris Wideman having no filter, some people like that, I get it. But at the same time, how many times in recent years has this happened? We've seen a few times this happen. Someone like, an E-Bug or an ATO goalie. We saw it happen with the Edmonton Oilers earlier this year. We see someone like Scott Foster a number of years ago for the Blackhawks, the E-Bug that came in and made a few saves for the Blackhawks. And oftentimes, the announcers praise it, the team praises it, even the other teams sometimes say, hey, like, that's awesome, man, you got your NHL moment. But Chris Wideman decides to say this after the game. I get it. The Habs were down a lot. They lost 7-1 to the Maple Leafs in quite embarrassing fashion. But Chris, you were kind of the reason that some of those goals happened, right? Like, I'm not saying that, being one of the worst players on the roster makes it like, oh, well, because you're not that good, you shouldn't be making these comments. No, what I'm talking about is like, regardless of who you are, you shouldn't be making these comments, but especially someone like Chris Wideman, who, he's signed for one more year with Montreal. But there's no question in my mind that he's been the Habs' worst defenseman who's played this season. And I don't know what they're going to do for next year. And you can't imagine that Coach Marty and the rest of the guys who've been building up this positive culture of encouraging each other, especially young guys. Think about how many young guys on Montreal have been given their first NHL chance really this year. Yeah, we've seen some guys like Harvey Pinard and Belzile play a couple games here and there. But this was their first year where they were really given a shot. Right, these guys who had no name, like they didn't have a name made for themselves yet. Marty St. Louis and the Habs gave him a shot because of the injuries. They've proven themselves. Jesse Ullinen, Jonathan Kovacevic, Justin Barron, all the young guys, everyone that you can possibly name. And so someone on the Leafs, an amateur tryout guy, he's never going to get a chance to get in the NHL action, probably the rest of his career. But guess what? Samsonov's not feeling the best and they're up 7-1. He'll come out for the last minute, let him play. As a guy on this Montreal Canadiens team especially, when the culture is supposed to be changing in this different way, yeah, you lose 7-1, yeah, it sucks. That was game 80 of a long 82-game season where you're really not winning many games. I can understand where the salt is coming from, but what I can't understand is why you would ever say this, why you would ever say this quote. I get it, maybe it was sarcastic, but I don't see the need. I don't see the need to put down a guy who is just living his dream. This guy went into the game. He's living his dream. He got into the NHL. You know what? I'm kind of glad that this tweet caught traction. I'm really glad that Habs fans, Leafs fans, NHL fans alike are kind of crapping on Chris Wideman for this, because it's putting more notoriety on Xhekaj Alexander's name. Xhekaj Alexander got to live his dream. I'm very happy for him. All of you guys should be happy for him as well. He got to live the dream that none of us pretty much ever got to live, right? I'm assuming none of you watching are NHL players, but who knows, right? So it's one of these times where I'm sympathetic for Leafs fans. As soon as I saw Chris Wideman said this, and actually it came out just after the game reaction last night, but I could not believe it. Please let me know in the comments what your thoughts are in this whole situation, because I'm really frustrated. As you guys know, I have been maybe the #1 Chris Wideman hater on Habs YouTube this whole season. I do not think he's a good fit. I'm not hating on Chris Wideman as a person, although I really think this is a terrible thing to say. I'm not, slandering him in any way, whatever. He's an NHL player. I'll never do it. He's living his life, whatever. I don't care. I completely disagree with this comment, though. I feel free to say whatever I want about his play, about his comments. I hope you guys feel that too, because, wow, I'm frustrated, and I kind of hope we don't see him back in Montreal ever again. There's my Chris Wideman rant. Let's move on. I've been waiting to do one of those all year, and I finally got a bit of a moment. And honestly, I felt like I went a little bit light. But speaking of the Habs young guys, the Habs loaned some guys down to Laval. The Canadiens ont cédé Jesse Ullinen, Raphael Harvey-Pinard, Corey Schoenemann, et Kaiden Primo au Rocket de Laval. And the reason for this is the Laval Rocket are currently in the midst of their playoff push. Playoffs start very soon. I believe there's only 3 games left for the Rocket in their 72-game season. And as of now, they're in sort of a play-in game to get into the playoffs. In the North Division, it goes by division in the AHL, it's a bit weird, but in the North Division, the top 3 teams get a bye, and the 4 and 5 teams have to play off, basically, to see who plays the 1 seed in the division. And the 1 seed in the division right now is the Toronto Marlies. You can see right here in the second part, the light blue one, the North Division. So as of now, the Marlies have the number 1 seed, Rochester and Syracuse at 2 and 3, the Battle of New York there. But right now it's Utica versus Laval in that 4-5 playoff game, if it started today, to see who would play the Marlies come the division semifinals. The problem is Laval is a bit behind Utica right now, but they can catch up. It'd be nice to get home ice, right, for that first playoff match. And they need every point they can get. They cannot catch up to Syracuse or Rochester, I don't believe. So it's really just fighting with Utica to see who will get that home ice advantage. You got to play the Marlies regardless, but it's kind of awesome, I think, to see the Habs going up and down with this Laval stuff, especially, using these guys who are still very young, who can't get claimed on waivers, obviously, once they're getting sent up and down. And Raphael Harvey-Pinard, you got to think especially, a guy who has proven that he's an NHL level forward at this point. The guy has been amazing since coming up from Laval. And he was one of their best players anyway, but you gotta think he's gonna go back down, and using that newfound NHL confidence, this guy's getting wherever he wants to go on the NHL ice, let alone in the AHL. You gotta wonder what he's gonna be able to do come playoff time. Even guys like Ullinen as well, who have a rocket of a shot and have shown that off in the NHL level, to go down and bolster this Laval team, who just added Jaden Struble, who got his first AHL point in their last game, Emil Heineman, who's now at 7 goals in 7 games for the Rocket. These guys might be a force to be reckoned with once the playoffs come, and it'd be really cool to see a Laval and Toronto matchup, just to mirror that Montreal-Toronto playoff matchup of a couple of years ago. So very excited for the AHL playoffs. So really cool to see those guys sent down. And final thing, I think it'll be cool if they play in the playoffs too, but we'll see. I'm sure they will, because the AHL season ends after the NHL. But speaking of things that happen after the NHL season, we got a bit of a Tankathon update, and when there's a slow news day, I like to update you guys on this, and usually I'd show the full Tankathon board, Montreal, Arizona fighting it out, but there's no updates on that, especially after last night's game where I told you guys that Montreal has now put themselves back in the 5th draft position. But there is one important thing, and I'm going to show you. Oh, sorry. Not that. It's this. So it's the Panthers, Islanders, and Penguins. This is currently the wild card race for the Eastern Conference. And as you can see, the Panthers and Islanders are tied. I believe the Panthers have the tiebreaker over the Islanders. And the Penguins are just below. And if you look at these win streaks, the Panthers have won 6 in a row. Which means they lost 4 in a row before the 6-game win streak. And Montreal gave them one of those wins. Montreal has lost every single time to Florida this year. So kind of deciding their own fate with this draft pick. But reminder, these teams each have 2 games left. If Florida manages to just maybe win 1 and the other teams each win 2, and Florida has the hardest schedule of those 3 teams, by the way, Florida can fall out of the playoff picture, and that pick can have a chance it'll sit at 14, I believe, and then it'll have a chance to jump even up higher, up to something like number 4 or 5 in the draft lottery. So this is a very important time for Habs fans. You got to be looking at Florida's schedule, not only Montreal's when it comes to the Montreal-Arizona battle for the top 5 draft pick, but Florida. These last few games are so important. You got to be cheering for Pittsburgh and the Islanders. As much as you may hate those teams, hopefully you hate Florida a bit more right now, because if the Islanders and Penguins can jump Florida in the standings, that pick now jumps into the lottery and has a chance to move up even higher. And regardless of even if it does or doesn't enter the lottery, it'll be a better pick for Montreal. So that's something to keep an eye on moving forward. But yeah, that's basically it. There wasn't a ton of news today, I really got to say, but that Chris Wideman thing, I felt like I had to talk about that. So let me know your thoughts on all these things today. Draft, lottery, AHL, people who put down to the AHL. By the way, those guys will get called back up. It's not a permanent thing. I think they're just playing, like, Laval has a game before Montreal's next game, which I think is Wednesday. So Laval has a game tomorrow, Monday, and those guys will play for them there. I'm sure they'll get called up because the Habs don't have enough players. They just straight up don't have enough players to play any more games, unless they call these guys back up. So very interesting stuff, but that'll do it for today's news edition of Habs Digest. If you enjoyed, leave a like, comment, subscribe to the channel. Help us hit 5,000 subs. We'd really appreciate it. I'm your host, Josh Gosse. We'll catch you in the next one.